Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Quantum Leap, Season 1, Episode 14. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So I kind of feel like an idiot because, once again, my knowledge of world history is garbage. I've talked about that time and time again. But the fact of the matter is, I was thinking like, could last episode have been like, could this be like something Pearl Harbor related? But it's like probably anyone that's like probably not an idiot like I am probably ended up being like, no, dummy, there's no way that's what that could be. Well, it turns out, because for one, this is years and years after the fact, because it's 1989. What makes this leap really, really interesting, besides Ben ending up in the body of someone on top of someone in a Navy ship. Turns out the XO of this Navy ship is Addison's father, played by Brandon Routh, which I was like, hey, interesting timing, because this week's episode of The Company You Keep, the actress who plays Ava in Legends of Tomorrow was there, so it's just like, hey, two Legends alumni. Obviously, he played Ray Palmer, aka the Atom, first introduced in Arrow, but would later on mainly be part of the Legends crew, so that was actually pretty dope. Because I remember there being someone, I remember stumbling across something, and there being someone in this episode I was going to recognize, but I couldn't remember until Brandon Routh showed up. I was like, hey, Brandon Routh! But that's interesting that he's Addison's father, which he has a very complicated relationship with her dad, because he was kind of cold and he wasn't the most nurturing or warm person growing up for her, so she has a very complicated relationship because he also has a complicated history. Basically, there was a ship that was secretive that no one only probably certain people knew about this ship. It's called the Tampa, being like out and about, and basically they sent out a distress signal, but apparently her dad ignored it, and it had such massive consequences because 130 some sailors ended up dying on that ship. And her father was kind of asked to leave active duty, and that caused some issues. And obviously we're bouncing back and forth between 89 and present day, where we're having these, theoretical conversations. Even Jen being like, how do we know Addison isn't going to Marty McFly herself out of existence? It's like, well, we have to worry about it. Addison was already alive at this point in time. And this point in time, in 89, she's already 2.5 years old, but we don't have to worry about that. The way Ian phrases it, basically, time travel doesn't fully fall out the way that movies and stuff make it seem unless you drastically, it has to be a mixed thing, has to drastically change someone for it to have such a sway on the type of person someone will be. So it's right, this shouldn't have too much of an effect on who he is, but it will change his story of his life, but not who he is at his core to some extent. So basically, when the distress call comes in, turns out Addison's father didn't ignore it. He actually wanted to answer it, but the person who told them to back down was Captain Drake. And for Addison, it flipped her entire mindset upside down, because she thought she knew her father. This is one of her father's greatest mistakes. It was, but not in the way she thought. It's because, for one, because the Master Chief talks to him about hey, he's getting worse and worse. So it seems like Drake has been making more and more aggressive decisions because he recently lost his wife, and that's that anger and that sadness is driving a lot of his, he's being kind of driven by emotion, which is such an interesting thing because for Addison, her dad has always been the cool, calm, and collected, never getting too emotional. So that's why when she saw him kind of getting a little aggravated, not Captain Drake, but her own father getting aggravated, she was like, wow, I've never seen my dad like that way before. He's always been the stone-faced stoic person. That's all she's ever known her father to be. So seeing this side of him, and I think this also enters that interesting and complicated nature of just how this doesn't just apply to the Navy, it applies to the military in general, but the conversation about like, yeah, the chain of command. Because yes, Ben wants to kind of voices his opinions, but it's like, right, you're not the high ranking officer here. You can't just speak however you want to. I mean, there is like that checks and balance of it. There is this hierarchy for a reason, obviously, but it's still that frustrating thing of like, right, I know you're doing the wrong thing, but when I talk, I'm talking out of term. And, Addison had to be the one to kind of like, right, because of the military experience, she had to kind of like say like, right, that you can't do that, Ben. You got to say, yes, Captain. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. And Ben ended up apologizing to Drake when he kind of spoke out of turn. So I didn't even know this either. I guess I'd actually randomly, like a Google alert randomly, like I think it's in an article that says like, oh, art imitates life because, not only is it the character Addison part of the was part of the military, so was Caitlin Bassett. And it's actually interesting because like you find out there's a lot more people who have like military connections that are actors. Like obviously one that comes to mind is I believe Adam Driver was in the military. There's another actor who's kind of like oh God, I can't remember. He's kind of typically in comedies, but I know he's also Rob Riggle. He's an ex-Marine. I was like, yeah, because I was like, he's the one that I see. He's the one I kind of think of the most when I think of like, oh yeah, like a military person being. Once again, he's typically in more comedy stuff, but he is in dramatic stuff from time to time. But it's like, yeah, but he's like one of the actors I think of when I think of like military. So that's always to me such an interesting thing when you find out like an actor has like legit military background. So I thought that was really interesting, being like, oh yeah, like she actually has a military background too. So that's always got to be interesting when it's just like, right. I mean, and I guess that adds to the authenticity of like, right, someone who knows him can probably tell you like, okay, like whether like that's not how it would actually happen in real life, and try to be as real and as authentic, especially on a story like this that I think, that is so personal to the character of Addison. I think it needs to kind of be all like very true to life in that regard. Make sure everything's kind of above board, that everything is kind of represented properly. Because I think it also comes from that conversation about like, yeah, kind of that struggles of those who are in the military and what kind of stays with them afterwards and what kind of effect that has on their family. I think it's part of that larger conversation too. So I think that's why it's even more important to kind of get the representation of that right. But first and foremost, it was about figuring out, like, okay, how can we prove that this is an American ship and it's not, because Drake is convinced, like, oh, it could be like a Chinese ship pretending to, draw us into the false sense of security and take us out. Because the whole thing at the beginning was like, war games. They're practicing, and hopefully it's like, right, what we're doing here means we will never have to actually kind of go to war or whatnot. So it's up to Ben, and he has this like back and forth with one of the operators, like Walker, and I was like, oh, the guy has like a funny sense of humor to him, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's like, oh, did you throw that away? He's like, yeah, I threw it in the trash. What? It's like, no, of course I did. Well, like, why would I do that? It's like, yeah, right. But basically, they compared the signals from like what a Chinese ship would be registering on like signal wise, like through the radio signals, and an American ship. So it proves like, okay, this is an American ship. So hey, we're gonna go rescue them. But Drake is convinced about taking out the Han ship behind him. It's like, I guess I think that's, if I remember correctly, that's the model of submarine ship that the Chinese were kind of using at the time, and I think he wants to take it out because, hey, it's following us. But obviously Ben raises his reservations about it, and so does Addison's father. But, Addison's father had to talk to him about, hey, like, you can't really do this. Because this kind of dives deeper into what, because it's something Magic had brought up of like, right, Addison's father did not roam, but he fell on his sword for Drake because Drake is a legend. But even Jen's like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, to kind of keep that legacy and that legend alive. And we kind of hear from why that's even more pertinent for Addison's father, because he's like, right, when I was young, I was angry. I was kind of rambunctious and Addison says like her dad never talked about his family. Turns out his father was a drunk, and whenever he wasn't drinking, he was beating on her father and her her dad's mom, and that made him like that darkness from his dad passed on to him. And for him, it's like, I carried that darkness with me. But Drake, he's the one that saw me. He found me. He got me enlisted. He's the one that saw something more in me. I became a better version of myself. I became so much more because of this man. I owe him everything. So it's like, it's his allegiances to the man that was kind of probably more of a strong figure in his life, especially, you know, when he didn't have that in his life when it came to his dad. So for him, he's let it, like, he recognizes that, yeah, Drake's got his issues, but he's a great man. He's a respectable man. And I'm not going to let you like stand there and talk about him. So we're going to end this line of talking and discussing right here. So because of that, her father didn't leap on the situation like he should have, because he was like, right, I don't completely agree, but he's a great man, so I'm not going to like screw him over. But when the time comes, like, they think at first they get attacked, but it turns out it's actually Chinese mines that had been left behind, because the Chinese had left. Initially, they had these mines spread out in like the Chinese waters, just so that like anytime an American ship or whatever secretly got into those waters, even though legally they're not supposed to, it's like, oh, we take some of your people on board, we take some of the people, we'll hold them for a couple weeks and force your government to acknowledge, and publicly we look like we're the ones in the right, because we are, but because we prove that you were in our waters without our permission, but then we'd steal some of your technology and stuff like that from your ship and stuff like that. It's meant to be a guise for all of that, give them that opportunity, because Magic ends up talking to a guy who he was opposite of. They were obviously on opposite sides of things back in the day in like '89, but he's the one that filled Magic in on about everything that kind of went down back then. And he was saying that luckily, because it's a good thing we're able to talk now, because if we weren't talking, like, because back then, because we weren't talking, we barely avoided a World War III. And he's like, I hope that we never like make that mistake again. That's why it's like, you know, it's kind of a good thing between governments to kind of communicate. It's like, right, you didn't know then because neither one of our sides, we were on opposite sides. We weren't going to tell each other what we were doing. But now it's like, yeah, that's that thing of espionage. Because even Magic was like, honestly, it's like from a tactical and strategic standpoint, like you using the mines in that regard makes perfect sense. Even he's like, in retrospect, I can give you, at the time, I would have never given you credit. Retrospect, I'm like, from the kind of like the spy games of it all, it's like, yeah, that was actually a really good strategy. But yeah, that's what this is all about. And obviously Ben can prove that they're mines and stuff, but the problem is, how can you say like, oh, they weren't just laid out? How can you say like, oh, because initially the reason why those mines are out there, just out there in the middle of the ocean, is because the weather was bad at one point in time and it swept some of those mines just out there in the water. That's what happened to the USS Tampa, as well as the ship they're on, the Montana. Like, it happened to them, but Drake is convinced it's got to be them. So he had earlier in the episode shot a warning shot at Han, so it's like not too bad. But it's like, right, like, we don't want to like be super aggro, because we might do something that might make them pop off and we got a whole issue. And as we know, because of Ziggy's calculations, when the Montana ends up hitting that ship, that Chinese submarine, it's going to start World War III. So South is going to pop off. So they're doing everything they can. Sadly, Addison's father trying to, because he ends up hitting the anchor and stopping all this, and he gets reprimanded for it and locked up in his room. And that's when we really kind of learned from him why he kind of raised Addison the way he did, because he's scared. He has this darkness inside of him, and he's scared that he has to keep it tight. He has to like put up walls, because he's afraid of the darkness that he got from his dad. It came to him, and he's afraid of passing it on to his daughter. So that's why he was kind of cold and distant when it came to Addison. And so because of that, you know, because he ends up talking about the fact that he's like, right, my wife doesn't love me anymore. The fact of the matter is, we both love Addison, but at the end of the day, like, I can't open up to my wife, and just worry of what kind of situation this will cause for Addison. But it's like, right, you've always done the right thing, so you have to do the right thing in this regard. I know it's not always going to be pretty. The fact is, you're going to have to basically take control from from Drake. And doing that, it's going to make it official. It's going to get nasty. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be you stabbing the person that you care about a lot in your back, the person who gave you this opportunity to help make you who you are today. But it needed to be done. And when the time came, the rest of the crew had Addison's dad's back, because they all recognize, like, once again, it's a chain of command where it's like they followed him because he's the second in command on the ship, so he has to rank for them to back him, because otherwise they can't just go against their commanding officers, or, they can't just go against the captain's orders. But when he's kind of flipping out, that's when Drake kind of took a look at himself, and he passes the leadership role over to Addison's dad, and ends up kind of like, going to, he's like, if you need me, I'm gonna be in my room. And luckily Ben was able to kind of calculate everything, and by taking the ship's signals, they were able to blow up the mines. It's like, yeah, it was a little close for comfort range wise, but it all worked out in the end, so that was pretty neat. But also Addison having that moment with her dad. Obviously Ben wasn't around, but her talking to her dad, obviously he can't hear her, but she's like, right, I know you're worried, Dad, but at the end of the day, it stopped with you, that darkness didn't come to me, that you did a good job, that everything is going to be okay. The fact of the matter is you helped make me into the person I am today, and I'm grateful for that. And as she was kind of like, her dad was kind of walking away, he just says to himself, it's going to be okay. Like, sadly, he probably is still very cold and distant towards Addison, but, because it did make her who she is today. But maybe, hopefully, this experience did change enough that maybe, just maybe, he had moments where he was a little more open with her. So maybe it's not all complicated. Maybe there was some, like, real good mixed in there, too, now that things have kind of played out differently in his story, so. Interesting developments. And then we also get a little stinger where it's like, oh, like the moment the guy's walking up on Ben, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, that must be Walker. I was like, hey, you guys are about to talk, but it turns out it's Martinez, and his character Martinez. They said at the end, I'm blanking. I want to say Leaper X, and it's like, wait, he's like, yeah, actually you helped me out on my mission. I'm like, wait, what? Why would you help me? It's like, no, technically you helped me. I'm like, because he's like, yeah, with the leap that I got, there's only so much I could do, but you helped me. He's like, I don't understand. He's like, yeah, because he was like, basically at the end of the day, I'm going to be the one that wins. And you're like, what? So this is a race of sorts? What's going on here? That's what's so confusing, because it's like, okay, so you were both on, well, I mean, they were on the same leap before, but they kind of avoided, they didn't really interact in the previous leap they were in together. He also said, like, oh yeah, you ran into a past me. So the fact is that you're like, but the fact is he's talked like that made it almost sound like, wait, had you not, I guess he was wondering like, okay, so we have met. Okay, I think that's what he was trying to be like, oh, okay, cool, so that event has already happened for you when we kind of met for potentially the first time. What is the first time when it's time travel? Oh, once again, it's like it's like the Doctor and River Song, or Claire and Henry. It's like constantly meeting out of time, obviously without the love. It's kind of a time traveling rivalry. It's a weird thing, like, it's a weird reference I'm about to make. It kind of reminds me of Ape Escape. Like Spike and, was it Spike and Jake? Because, that involves time travel and best friends that are kind of turned into enemies type of thing. I'm going on a whole tangent, but yeah. I mean, obviously these characters aren't best friends, at least not that we're aware of. Because he don't seem like him and, I mean, obviously Ian and Ben are best friends, and Ian came back in time for something. I love that kind of tying this all together. Magic did have this conversation with Jen. I mean, it started off earlier with Jen, Magic, and Ian of like, right, so the fact is that we would get a leap that would be so close to home that Ben, who's engaged to Addison, would just happen to go to a leap that would leap him into a body connected to Addison's father. Like, that's interesting. I mean, there's also the ties, but I mean, it's not the same thing. But let's not forget, the reason why Magic's a part of this is because Sam leaped into his body at the time, and that led to Sam saving his own brother. But that's kind of a little different in this regard. I mean, obviously it's kind of touched close to home in that regard. And obviously for Jen, it's like her father was a part of the project. So like those are direct correlations, but this is a little different when it comes to the leaping aspect of it all. So it's like, right, could this be random? And could someone do it on purpose? And Ian, it's like, maybe you could, but it'd be extremely hard to do it, but it also doesn't believe it's any coincidence. So I love that quote. I'd actually never heard that quote before, but he quoted Martin Luther King saying like, right, the moral, what was it? It was kind of like the moral length of the universe. Oh God, I'm going to butcher the quote. I don't remember it. I'm not going to remember it properly, but saying like, it's so expansive, like the moral compass of the universe, because it's almost like a thing of like, it kind of leans, it's so expansive across the board on both sides, but he believes that the universe kind of bends more towards justice, and he believes that's what quantum leap is, that we are that part of the universe. Like our role in all of this is, when it comes to this time travel and everything, it's our role is to bend, and it bends towards doing right. So it makes you wonder, does that mean that Martinez is like, Leaper X is on the other side of that he is the side of things that bends more towards injustice, or what? Once again, like, why does he say like, I'm going to be the one that win? Like, is there something he's out to do? And, you know, whatever it is, I guess Ian stopped him. Cause like, I don't remember when Genevieve met him if he had gray hair, cause he has gray hair now. So I guess improving that he's older. Cause he didn't seem, cause like with the flashback, it didn't seem like he had gray hair. So like, how far into the future is this Martinez doing this? Like, has he been doing this for a hot minute? I mean, we know Sam got lost in this for years. So like, could he have been doing this for years too? Or I guess everything Ben's been doing is kind of to counter whatever it is Martinez is doing, or maybe he's doing his thing and came back in time to get Ben to stop Martinez from doing whatever he's a part of. Once again, maybe it's the Quantum Leap project across, rather than just the two, you know, different time periods, whether it's like Sam's era or whether it's Ben's era. Maybe it's like now a battle against Ben's era versus Leaper X's era of whatever time frame that is, that he ends up becoming a part of the project. Because we know that the Ian that leapt back in time to tell Ben was a couple years older. And like I said, we see with Martinez, it seemed like he was a little gray in the hair, so implying he's older too. So fascinating how that all plays out. So Ben's obviously, once again, just as confused. What this all means, we'll ultimately have to wait to see. Obviously, the next leap for Ben is inside of a lawyer. So what that looks like, how that all plays out, we'll ultimately have to wait to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.